just thought it might be useful to give credit where it's due for these videos, really. Not specific credit, but credit in terms of where the ideas come from. So of course what tends to happen is that I get up about 5:30, 6 o'clock and check my email and then go on the various sites that I'm bookmarked, read what's happening, maybe read a book or an article, something like that in the morning. And I do that for a couple of hours until it's time to get the kids. Actually I do it until 6:30 when it's time to get the kids up for their paper round. And then make the breakfast. And after they've gone out on their paper rounds, or sometimes they've gone to school, I take the dogs out and see what happens, really, to see what occurs to me. And what occurs to me is usually something to do with whatever I've been reading that day, but sometimes not. Sometimes it's unrelated. Even the unrelated stuff, though, of course, it's not just appearing miraculously in my head like some sort of vision of genius. It's kind of absorbing through some sort of osmotic process, I guess. All the other stuff that I've looked at and listened to, and the videos I've looked at, some of the YouTube videos I've seen from some of the excellent video makers that I'm subscribing to, that I've looked at. So all that stuff is, I think, at play in my head, even though I don't really think about it on a moment-to-moment basis. And I can often, to the extent that I can remember its origins at all, it's usually just what I've most recently read. I can sometimes remember more specific references. But what seems to be happening is there's kind of sort of, this is not going to sound very clear at all, but there's a kind of cloud of fairly vague and amorphous, multivalent knowledge out there, which I'm kind of tapping into. And at certain points it seems to become relatively coherent in my mind, to the extent that I can talk around it, not necessarily coherently and not or concisely, and not reduce it to bullet points. I can sort of wander through the territory of those ideas for a while, which is what I'm doing on these videos. So to the extent that these videos are useful at all for me, and the extent that they're short and relatively and have sort of content, that content is kind of distilled or made consilient from the places that I've got it. What I tend to do later on, and either sometimes in the same day but sometimes later, is write some stuff down. Actually, I sometimes write it down first, or have a pass at writing it and then try and make a video later, but that's not usually the case. Usually I come back to it and then think, oh, let's make a note of that. And sometimes it's a couple of thousand words, and other times it's just a sentence. Good morning, beautiful day.
Yeah, lovely, isn't it?
Oh, it's great. And so, where was I going with that before that? Oh yeah, so I usually so I try to write some of it down. And on one or two occasions I thought, I wonder if I'd like to transcribe this stuff, so I've transcribed it. And of course it's absolute rubbish. But what seems to be happening with that, just to place that whole thing in some sort of context, is that it's a kind of increasing solidification of that whole process. It's a whatever this ethereal, it's not really ethereal, whatever this mass of knowledge that I'm allowing to cohere as ideas, or to sort of crystallize in my mind, starts off as some sort of, or feels as if it starts off as some kind of airy, highly ephemeral, highly vague feeling. Then through these videos it starts to become more like a territory, more fluid, more performative, more mobile, more procedural, those kind of things. And then if I do actually transcribe it, the transcribing, it feels really false, I have to say, but it starts to acquire something of the consistency of an ill-formed object, and the extent to which it's ill-formed is very evident at that point. And then when if I eventually write it down, or find a way to reapproach these thoughts in words, then it starts to. It doesn't acquire the consistency of an object, actually, that's not true. It seems to acquire the consistency of a location in knowledge space. That's more how it feels. I don't know what that means ontologically. That's the sensation I have from doing it. On one or two occasions I've made objects out of this stuff. Actually, even saying that, it sounds bizarre. I did an exhibition a few months ago making what I referred to as art objects, although I'm not really sure if that's what they were. And again, that's when they started to appear as kind of object-like points in an otherwise inarticulable knowledge space. Yeah, obviously there were actual physical objects there, nothing ephemeral about them at all, even though they hold the promise of ephemerality and sort of hark back to their origins in the ephemeral. It's really hot today, I'm sweating. I don't know why I've got this jacket on.